Would you like to play some football?
Welcome to Gridiron and the Gospel of Faith in College Football Podcast. We have a national champion, and we are right here to talk about it right now, right after the game, and you guys are listening to it the day after the game. My name is George Schroeder.
And I'm Brad Edwards, and no surprise, George, the team that everybody thought was going to won the game, but it didn't quite play out the way that a lot of people thought that it would, and especially not the way that you thought it would play out if you were watching it up till halftime. Very surprising second half, and we'll get into that, but man, I give Notre Dame so much credit, not only for getting to this point, but the way that they represented themselves in that national championship game. But I guess we got to start by giving credit to the Buckeyes. They're the ones who are the national champions, right?
Final score, 34-23 Ohio State, and the Buckeyes win it. And the better team tonight won. This is my assessment. The best team this season is the national champion, which is not a given. Those two teams played 16 games, Brad, which we may talk about tonight, and we certainly will talk about next week, probably, about the length of the season. And so it's a war of attrition. Some of it's going to have to do with injuries or not injuries. But the best team, the most talented team, is not always the best team. In this case, the best and most talented team, in my opinion, is Ohio State. And I know that's easy to say now. Neither one of us was probably going to say they were the best team after the final game of the regular season against Michigan. But that team's really good, is my point. Is it great? I don't know, but we can talk about that later. But Ohio State is, in my opinion, the best team.
Yeah, look, I think before the season started, we probably all would have said, based on the roster, the most talented team was Ohio State. And that they didn't have any significant, well, I shouldn't say they didn't have any significant injuries. They did lose the Remington Award winner for best center in the country.
They had shuffle on the O-line. There's no question.
Yeah, they did have some injuries, but even with that, I still think going into the playoff, people would have questioned whether they were the best team, but they still would not have questioned whether they had the most talent and had the highest ceiling. If they played up to their talent level, was there anyone that could beat that team? Probably not, but they had a few games in the regular season where they didn't play close to that talent level. And given the draw that they ended up with, because they were the 8th seed, the 4 teams they were going to have to go through to win the national championship, it seemed like a long shot. Honestly, if we can put ourselves back in middle of December, before they came out and annihilated Tennessee, based on what we had seen the last time they had taken the field at home against Michigan, there was no reason to believe that this team had a really good chance to win the title. But man, they became the team that everybody expected them to be, and like you said, they were the best team, and they are now the national champs.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to put a pin in that and go back to sort of that, because I almost feel like they became something they weren't all year. It's almost like it was a new season, a fresh start, that kind of thing. And I think we can get into that in a minute. But just about this game, much credit, as you mentioned earlier, to Notre Dame for making a game of it and making some tense moments happen. No question about that. But Ohio State scored touchdowns on their first 4 possessions. Each drive was more than 70 yards, and they looked unstoppable. And then I think their 5th possession, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but their 5th possession was also the score, and it was a field goal. So minor consolation. But it looked like a machine out there, which is what they have looked like against a really
one of the best defenses in the country. Yeah.
Well, look at the defenses they went through, and to their credit, Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit brought this up. They went through a Tennessee defense that was really good. I mean, they shredded them, but they blew that team out. But the Tennessee defense was really good. I don't think it was overrated. I think their defensive line was really good. Maybe the back end wasn't as good as people thought. And then help me out here. Next thing you know, they
Oregon
shut down I mean, Oregon's got a good defense, and they just rolled them in the first half. 34-0 at one point, and it resembled what we saw from Notre Dame or against Notre Dame, except Notre Dame scored on that tremendous opening drive. And then, and they just looked really. And then Texas had a really good defense, and they didn't score quite as easily, but they kind of shot themselves in the foot with penalties and things like that against Texas, or who knows what happens. Right now, we don't have to play hypotheticals, but we can. I'm just saying, look at the defenses they rolled through as their offense got on track in the playoff.
Yeah, and look, I think you could make the argument that they didn't roll through Texas. Texas held
but they
Ohio
shot
State's
themselves in the foot.
With some penalties, right? But Ohio State's offense scored 3 touchdowns in that game, and one of them came on a play that I don't want to say that Texas was looking ahead to halftime, but I think it was a strange situation with the screen pass with under 30 seconds to go, going 75 yards to the house. Which, look, I think we look back on this now and you realize how good Texas defense was.
No question
to be able to hold them in check the way that they did. But still, in that game, Ohio State made the plays on defense at the end to win it. Tonight, at least in order to seal it, made a huge play on offense when the game, it's hard to say that it came down to that play because Notre Dame still was going to have some work to do to have a chance to tie it up. But man, would the mood everywhere have changed if they had not converted that 3rd and long on the last drive. And in order to do it, they put the game or put that moment in the hands of Will Howard, who you and I at various points this season have kind of pointed to as the weak link of this offense. He comes out tonight and he completes, I think it was his first 12 pass attempts, and he ends up going, I think it was 17 of 21. And, 3rd and long, they let him throw deep to Jeremiah Smith. And it looked like a very simple throw and catch, but to call that type of play and to allow Howard to attempt that throw in that situation was incredibly risky. And they showed a lot of confidence in him, and he delivered. So, as we talk about that offense, I think it kind of starts with him. Despite all the talent of the other guys around him, he stepped up after having had a couple of games this season where people really doubted him. Many people other than us doubted him. And man, he was just great in the college football playoff.
Well, he was, and he was really good tonight. And again, we're recording this late Monday night. Still Monday night, even on the East Coast where you are, but late Monday night, and you guys are listening to it later, on the next day or something. But he was really good all year. And keep in mind, when he hit the portal and came into the portal from K-State, it's not just during the season. It's, this time a year ago when he leaves K-State and goes into the portal and Ohio State takes him, there were some it felt kind of meh. I mean, I just be honest, that's how I felt about him. I watched him at K-State.
I felt like, can't the Buckeyes get somebody better than that? That was that was my thought, right?
And frankly, they made a play for Dylan Gabriel, who was tremendous for Oregon this year, but they got Will Howard. And as it turns out, he was a tremendous pickup for them, as you were just saying. And on that play, it was 3rd and 11, some 2.5 minutes to go. And on that play, it was a great throw. And, it was Jeremiah Love too. It's worth noting that it's the freshman receiver. I'm sorry, Jeremiah Smith. Jeremiah Love, of course, a really good Notre Dame running back. But Jeremiah Smith, tremendous freshman receiver. I'm just going to tell you, I want to say one thing about him, and then I want to talk about just sort of the circumstances surrounding that play. Jeremiah Smith, if they had the one and done rule like the NBA, like NCAA and NBA have, he would be going out and he might be the first pick in the draft. But if he's not the first pick, he's a top five pick right now as a freshman. I have seen 2 or 3 guys that as freshmen were ready for the NFL. And I mean, literally, and you and I both covered college football a long time. Adrian Peterson was one, running back for Oklahoma. Help me out. I've lost my mind. The kid from South Carolina, defensive tackle. He was ready.
Clowney.
Yeah, Jadeveon Clowney. And I don't even know that he had I'm just saying he was physically ready as a freshman.
Physically ready. Yep.
Yeah, Jeremiah Smith, physically ready as a freshman. He's got all the intangibles. Amazing player. So they throw the ball to him. He's open. Part of the reason he's open is because he didn't get jammed by the corner. But I don't know if that made a big difference. The bigger reason he's open is because Al Golden sent everybody. He blitzed the house. And Travion Henderson, the running back, made a nice pickup in the middle of one of the blitzers. And so basically, I don't know if they were in cover zero or not, but that's what it looked like. So there's no real safety help over the top. There was a safety there, but he ended up looking for a short crossing route and kind of helping there. And so you have a cornerback out on an island, which is what they do, and it was no contest. But you still have to deliver the ball perfectly, and then you still have to catch it, and they did. So I'm not ripping on Al Golden, the Notre Dame defensive coordinator. He did a really nice job all year long, and even in a tough situation, certainly in the second half. And maybe that's what they felt they had to do. But you still have to make the play, and Ohio State did, and then they won.
Yeah, and as you laid it out, that situation was where Notre Dame had to get a stop on that play to keep alive their chance of winning the game. And what you cannot do in that situation is, number one, you can't allow a run to pick up the first down on 3rd and 11 or whatever it was. You also cannot allow them to complete a screen. And then with Ohio State, the thing you're always concerned about, because it's such a staple of Ryan Day's offense, is the crossing route. And with all those things in your mind, you got to leave yourself vulnerable to something. And the deep ball, that's one of those where it's like, hey, if they attempt it and they hit it, give them credit.
That's right.
Because if you're going to get beat defensively, that's what you're going to give up. They did. And like we said, give Will Howard credit. It wasn't a difficult catch by Jeremiah Smith, but, we've seen guys in that situation before where they're so open that it kind of freaks them out and they drop it. But yeah, it was kind of in a way, I found myself hoping they wouldn't convert, because I wanted to see if Notre Dame had it in them to drive one more time down the field. Because here's the crazy thing, just to kind of get back to the Notre Dame part of it. If before the game, if anyone had said that Notre Dame would have 40 yards rushing, is what I think it ended up being, somewhere in that neighborhood. Notre Dame's running backs combined for 16 rushing yards. I mean, if you told me that before the game, I would have told you, first of all, Notre Dame scores in single digits. And second, they're losing by probably 30 or more. and even though Riley Leonard was their leading rusher, he didn't have a ton of rushing yards. And it ended up being the team that, we felt like, look, the weakness here when you match up and you look at tail of the tape is that Notre Dame did not have a downfield passing game. And once they fell behind by 24 midway through the third quarter, then you definitely feel like this thing's over, because now that Ohio State knows that Notre Dame has to pass, there's no way they're going to be able to throw the ball, because even in normal situations, they're not great at it. And yet, Riley Leonard found a way, and it was crazy just watching Notre Dame string together first downs when Ohio State knew they were going to throw the ball. And Jaden Greathouse, he made a couple of incredible plays. And next thing you know, I guess, George, here's what we found out. What we found out in the playoffs is that the biggest weakness of this Ohio State team is defending 2-point conversions. Because if there's anything that we could point to, I think Oregon went 2 for 2, I believe. And then Notre Dame went 2 for 2. So they're not very good at defending 2-point conversions, which is crazy considering how great they were as a short yardage / goal line defense all season. So Notre Dame got those touchdowns. They got the 2-point conversions to get it to a 1-score game. Actually missed a chip shot field goal that would have had it within a single score, less than a touchdown at the very end, which would have added to the drama. But once again, give Notre Dame credit for coming back in a way that no one would have thought them capable of doing. But Ohio State really won that game. I would say, George, it was the response to Notre Dame's opening drive. You mentioned it briefly, but Notre Dame gets the ball to start the game. what was it, 18 plays, like 9 minutes
18
and 15
plays,
seconds,
9:45. Yeah.
touchdown. You could not have drawn it up any better as a way to start the game. But from that point, Ohio State, like you said, 4 consecutive drives, all of them touchdowns. And that was when the game was won. At that point, the lead was too big for Notre Dame to ultimately overcome. And so, yeah, it really was that response. And more than anything, you'd probably look at it and say it was the second quarter. The
Yeah.
dominance of Ohio State in the second quarter ended up being the difference in the game.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And it was, I hate that first drive by Notre Dame gets lost. But the reason it gets lost is because of what you just talked about. Ohio State just put it on Notre Dame at that point. But that first drive was a thing of beauty. I think you texted in our
It
group
was.
thread something about something going according to script. Nothing could have gone better than that. And I don't disagree at all. They ran, of those 18 plays, 9 of them were run plays by the quarterback. Several of them were 3rd and 1s. A couple of them were 4th and 1s. And they kept running the quarterback, Riley Leonard. And, he had 9 carries in the drive. His previous high, I think, was 18 against Penn State, which, by the way, is part of this too. They decided to unleash the quarterback run game a little bit as they got into the playoff, because it's like, nobody wants a quarterback to get injured ever, but you do definitely try to protect even a guy who can run during the year so he doesn't get injured. But at that point, you're at the point where it's like, now it's time to let it all hang out. And so they did. That was a thing of beauty, that drive. Grinding drive, in time and length and everything, and even the run and the quarterback, it kind of reminds you of Army or somebody, or Navy in a lot of ways. But, and by the way, Riley Leonard, that's a guy who's easy to root for. He's not a great passer. He's just an all-around good quarterback, but he's a guy that's easy to root for. And I just want to quick shout out. There's a story in Baptist Press, which of course is at one point I worked for after I left USA Today. I actually ran Baptist Press for a while, and it's about Riley Leonard, who is a committed follower of Christ. And so I loved reading that story even today about Riley Leonard. Will Howard, after the game, I also appreciated him giving glory to God. I appreciate that too. I just want to say this. I know we're on the football half, but there's something going on among college students, larger, but college athletes is where we see it happening. Because they're visible. Some kind of awakening going on spiritually, and I'm here for it and excited about it. So y'all pray that would continue, and that would grow. But it was
I'm going to get into this in the second half.
Okay. Yeah. It's been fun to see that happening. We'll talk about it a
little bit more. Yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, let me just say this though. You mentioned that Notre Dame missed a field goal attempt down 16 in the midway through the fourth quarter. It doinked off the left upright. I got to be honest with you. I know it was 4th and goal, and it wasn't exactly close. It wasn't, it was 6 or 7 yards out.
I believe.
Yeah. And I know you're saying that later on, it's like, well, that would have put you within 1 score, no question. But if you hit that, you're still down 13. You're still down 2 scores. So I actually think they'd have been better off going for it right there. Marcus Freeman has done a tremendous job. He's a little bit better coach than I've ever thought I would be. So I'm not here. These guys make these calls in the moment, but I really feel like that was a mistake, not because it missed, but not going for it. You score a touchdown there. There's still 6.5, 7 minutes or whatever it is left. Now it's a really, really tight game. And then, of course, obviously they ended up scoring the touchdown. So who knows what happens? I don't know. That's my thought. I mean, if got to quibble with the coach at some point, right?
Yeah. Look, I would not have done the same thing that he did. I was surprised I was really surprised when he sent the kicker out there in that situation. And of course, it makes it look worse when he misses the kick. But then when they get to the end of the game and they've got Ohio State, well, I say end of the game, just 2.5 minutes to go, and they've got them in 3rd and long with a chance to get the ball back. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? As much as I disagreed with it, it's hard for me to argue that I'm not saying it was the best decision, but it's hard for me to argue that it was a bad decision, because if they just get the stop there and get the ball back, which whether they make that field goal at that point or miss it, or let's say they go for it on fourth down and they don't get it, they still were going to have to get the ball back one more time, which they never managed to do. But if they did it, then it would have looked brilliant. And so I'm not gonna rake him over the coals for that, but I think most coaches wouldn't have done it. But here's the other thing, George, though. I think it tells you how little confidence he really had in his passing game.
Yeah,
and this is the
that's
guy
right.
who's out there watching them in practice every day, all season, and he's like 4th and 9, 4th and goal from the 9 against this defense. I don't like our chances, and which really just kind of underscores how improbable it was that Notre Dame made the comeback they did to get in that situation, because even their coach apparently wasn't a real big believer in their ability to throw the ball when Ohio State knew they were going to throw, and yet they managed to get back into it. But you mentioned Marcus Freeman, whether it's the preparation that led to that opening drive, which, as you said, was a work of art, whether it's the way that the team didn't give up, fought back and made a game of it when it seemed like it was easily over. You give him so much credit, but I think we can't finish this podcast without also talking about Ryan Day.
No
And
question.
this win for him, what this does for his reputation as a coach, just weeks removed from a point where I don't want to act like the entire fan base wanted to get rid of him, but certainly there were some people in that fan base who would not have minded if they never saw him on the Ohio State sideline again. After losing for a 4th straight year against Michigan, looked for all the world like he was going to fail to capitalize on this roster, which had just been pieced together for the purpose of winning a national championship. As we said before the season, like, it was obvious this was the most talented roster in the country, and it looked like he had blown it. But for him personally to be able to bounce back from that and to go on this run, and not just to win it, but to win it pretty emphatically. It's just, how it is where you get certain guys in various sports who were really, really good. Their numbers were really good, but they didn't have a championship. And so therefore it just changes the way they're remembered. Well, in college football, look, we know, right? There are only 2 active coaches right now before tonight who have a national championship. It's just Kirby Smart and Dabo Swinney. So now with Ryan Day being added to that list, he's in a small group of people, and this will forever change the way that he is perceived. And his winning percentage already spoke for itself. Now
Right.
he has that missing piece.
Yeah, I think that they'll go ahead and fire him for losing to Michigan and really just, yeah. No, you're right. Look, it's 4 in a row to Michigan, right? And we shouldn't that's a big deal, but you just won the national championship. And all right, I know Ohio State, Michigan, I understand what it is, okay? I get it. It doesn't matter which side of the rivalry you're on, you can't keep losing to the other team. However, if you win the national championship in the same year, that completely mitigates that. And here's what I want to say. 16 games. They looked like a different team in the playoff. And that's not always going to happen. And sometimes you're going to have the deal where you have a great game in this game in the playoff and not such a good game the next game, and you either lose or you barely win. But my point is, we're in a different era. And I think as we move forward, because it's going to go from 12 teams to 14 teams at some point here in the next couple of years, and then at some point it'll be 16, and you and I will argue about how many it ought to be, and
Let's
all
hope
that.
it stops there, but yeah.
Right. But even with 12 teams, the playoff has felt like a whole different season. It's occupied, a month basically of our time. So it's much longer. It's occupied a third of the regular season, basically, right? It's like an extra third added to the regular season. I say all that to say, assuming you get into the playoff and make waves in a playoff, and especially if you win a national championship, losing to your rival, I don't care if it's that kind of rivalry, isn't going to matter nearly as much as it used to. And obviously it was a be-all, end-all. You wouldn't get into the playoff previously if you lost your rival. But my point is, I think it's going to, yes, you want to beat Michigan with everything you have. Yes, Michigan wants to beat Ohio State with everything you have. Alabama, Auburn, whatever, OU, Texas, same thing, right? I get it. But if you get into the playoff and then you go win some games or win the whole thing, people are going to forget in a lot of ways that you lost that game. Whereas in any other year, they would never forget. I just think we're headed down that road. I bet 5 years from now, and that's actually a sad thing in some ways, because it does say that the regular season is not going to mean as much. But I just think that's how it's going to go. And this is the first year really that this could have happened for them. We could have done some hypothetical scenarios where you lose to Michigan and still get into the playoff, the 4-team playoff, and win it, obviously, but it's hard to have happen. This is the first year that could have happened for them. And, so I just think
George,
we're in a different era.
Yeah. I mean, I think back to the 2017 season so for Auburn, their two biggest rivals are Alabama and Georgia. They beat both of them in the regular season while they were ranked number one. Like Georgia and Alabama were both ranked number one. Auburn beat both of them. You would think this is the greatest season in the history of Auburn football, or at least up there. Well, it turns out Alabama and Georgia both get into the 4-team playoff, end up playing each other in the national championship game. And at that point, it didn't matter who won the game. If you're Auburn, who by the way had lost its bowl game to UCF just a week earlier,
that was truly a didn't want to be, and that was a good UCF team, but that was truly a didn't want to be there type of game.
But I'm just saying, at that point, once it became Alabama versus Georgia for the national championship, it no longer mattered that Auburn had beaten both of them at the regular season.
Absolutely.
All that mattered was that those teams ended up having a better season than Auburn did. And I think about it in basketball.
And it didn't matter on the other end. It didn't matter on the other end that Alabama had lost to Auburn, which is the bigger rivalry.
Right. Alabama was the national champion. And it'd be like in basketball, if Duke, Carolina, let's say Duke sweeps the regular season, wins both meetings, but then Carolina ends up winning the national championship and Duke doesn't make the Final Four. You think Carolina fans really care that they lost? But that's what's happening now with college football. Is that it's
agreed.
The regular season? It's not meaningless like college basketball, but it's getting there to the point where
it's
some
less
of these
meaningful.
Games less meaningful. That's a good way to put it.
Maybe the regular season is not less meaningful. Maybe it's not less meaningful, but each individual game, even the rivalries, are at least a little less meaningful, maybe a lot less meaningful, but they're less meaningful. Maybe that's the way to say it. I don't know.
We saw that in September, back when some of these highly ranked teams took their first loss of the season. You kind of shrug your shoulders like, oh, well, they can still lose one more and probably be okay. Which, I mean, that took some getting used to. And I guess, a couple more years we'll be accustomed to that, which is like, hey, as long as let's put it this way. If you are in the Big Ten of the SEC, you probably can get away with losing two, still get in the playoff. That's just going to become the norm. And you know what? I mean, George, we mentioned how Ohio State, I think we mentioned last week that 2014, the first year of the 4-team playoff, they got in as the 4 seed, would not have gotten in the previous year under the previous format, but they got in.
Shouldn't have gotten in that year.
The field expanded. Won the national championship. This year, with their 2 losses, they would not have gotten in under the previous format when it was only 4 teams. They got in and they won it.
I've got TCU and Baylor on line 2 and 3 for you.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it was good timing for the Buckeyes. But I think one other takeaway that I think for fans, I think a lot of fans, if you had told them before the season started that the 8 seed was going to win the playoff, they would have Cinderella, it's like basketball. No, this is what you need to get used to in college football. When a team outside of the top 4 seeds wins a national championship, it is almost certain it's going to be a team like Ohio State, which was top 4 in talent, had a disappointing regular season, but the format gives them a second chance, and then they hit their stride and they play their best toward the end. That's I'm not saying we're going to see this all the time, but I think when we do see a team that by seed would seem to be a Cinderella. It's going to be a team that is one of the most talented teams in the country.
I think that's right. Now, there are some possibilities of some changes. Any change to next year's setup has to be unanimous among the conference commissioners, and it's not just the four; it's all of them. Whatever that is now, 10, I guess. There used to be 11. Now there's 10 FBS conferences. So there's not going to be anything giant as a change. But you could see some changes down the road to where the conference champions do automatically qualify the top five, but you're not guaranteed one of the top four slots as a berth, as a bye. That's not going to change for next year, I don't think, because they couldn't get unanimity on that. But eventually that might change. I don't know why that's a problem. We all act like that's a problem. You got to go play the games you play. It is what it is. If you want a bye, win your conference. Win your conference. That's the way I look at it. But that maybe is a conversation.
The
conversation
rules
for
are
next week.
laid out before the season starts, right? I mean, whether you like it or not, the rules are laid out before we start playing games. You know what they are. You know what you have to do to get a bye. So, look, it might not work out the way that fans would have drawn it up if they could have done it their way. And I don't think it'll be that way beyond next season. But,
Right.
it is what
Agreed.
it is, and we'll get through one more year. So,
yeah, I mean, so that's good. Well, I mean, it was as you and I were texting during the game, it seemed like it was going to be kind of a laugher. I saw tweets or posts on X from friends of ours who still cover the sport that basically it's beginning to remind me of 42-15 or whatever the score was. I think that was the actual score. It might have been 42-14 of the that last. Was it the last BCS championship game that Alabama beat them?
Alabama Notre Dame.
Yeah, second to last. That's right. And it felt like. Let me just put it this way: had Ohio State been able to maintain the big lead, this would not have been that game, because this Notre Dame team is really, really good. It's not that they were outclassed. And the reason that I can say that, despite if there had been a lopsided score, which there wasn't, but despite that, is because we have seen them through the playoffs. They didn't just get there because of a computer formula or because of a committee. They had to then win their way to the game. And so they are much better than some of these Notre Dame teams we have seen, in the playoff in the 4-team iteration or in that BCS title game that I'm talking about. This was a really good Notre Dame team. Not as good as Ohio State, but a really good Notre Dame team. We saw them beat some very good teams, right, including Georgia. So I really like that Notre Dame team. But this Ohio State team, best team all the way through, and a deserving champ. I'm glad we ended up with a good game because frankly that's a fitting into a really good, weird, brand new, everything's different 2024 football season.
Yeah. Well, so the question I have now looking ahead is, and maybe this is a good place for us to segue into our pick segment. My question is, can Ohio State reload/rebuild? I mean, it's almost a rebuild because they're going to lose a lot of key guys off that team. And we know they are one of the top recruiters in college football, plenty of talent sitting behind those guys. But to be a real threat to repeat, I think they're going to have to go into the portal and grab a few players at some key positions who can come in and start. Whether those guys are out there, whether they're going to have a chance to sign them, I don't know. I can't imagine Ohio State being as good next year as they were this year, but that doesn't mean they can't win it. So with that, unless you've got something else to add on the game, let's because this is kind of the direction we're going to go with the pick segment.
Yeah, and as for the last several weeks, we're thankful to the Faith and Sports Institute at Baylor's Truett Seminary for sponsoring the picks. Think deep, lead strong, run the race well. The Faith and Sports Institute is a team of athletes, coaches, chaplains, and scholars who provide theological education, compelling research, and formative practices for Christian leaders in sports. Graduate degree programs. They've got online certificate programs, and there's a Master of Arts in Theology and Sports Studies online. It is unique in the space, and we really appreciate Baylor's Truett Seminary and the Faith and Sports Institute there at Baylor for sponsoring the picks. Yeah, here's the thing, and I'm not making a pick here, but I don't know what Ohio State will be, but I think we're entering an era where you don't have to be great to win. Because as good as I'm saying Ohio State was, I don't know that it was a great team. Now, I think it was great in the last 3 or 4 games during the playoff, this new season that we're talking about. But would you call that one of those? It's not one of the. I don't know that it clearly wasn't a juggernaut all year. I mean, they beat some teams the way they should have beaten them. They lost when they ran out of time at Oregon. Obviously, they lost to Michigan. But look, Nebraska had them on the ropes in Columbus. So they weren't a great team. So you don't have to be a great team. Here's the thing. We're about to make a pick. I'm going to pick a national champion for 2025. You're going to pick a national champion for 2025. And basically, Old Takes Exposed will just have a field day with it because how does anybody know? This isn't like your grandfather's games of 2 or 3 years ago or seasons when you knew, okay, well, Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State and these teams are just going to reload. Let's just pick one of them. I mean, I think that's safe. Let me tell you which one I'm not picking out of that group, though, is Alabama. I'm concerned that quite possibly the Bamas might not be a playoff team next year, but that's a whole other topic for a whole other time. So you got a pick for somebody to be to win it all next year?
Yeah, not one I'm really excited about because like you said, in past years, you could do these way too early picks, and you at least had a pretty good idea of who was going to be on the roster because you know who's a senior, you know who's likely to go out early for the draft, and then the rest of them are back. Now, you don't know. I mean, you could have starters decide to hit the portal. You definitely are going to have guys who are going to transfer in who were not dressed out, for the playoff, for those teams that were in the playoff. So it's a lot more difficult to just kind of pin down what that roster is going to look like. I'm going to go with Oregon. And I'm doing that just because I like their consistency over the last few years. Dan Lanning's ability to bring in a transfer quarterback and just kind of seamlessly integrate him into an offense, build around him. And they have gotten that program to a point where they're so solid on the lines of scrimmage that we've talked about this, during the regular season. That this isn't, the old Chip Kelly Oregon teams where, as much as I think those teams were unfairly identified as being finesse or speed, you don't run for 300. Chip Kelly used to say this to us all the time. Remember, you don't run for 300 yards a game being finesse. That's just not the way college football works.
But along the lines, they did not stack up to the elite on either side of the ball.
Certainly on the defensive front, and certainly on the defensive front, that was where they would usually come up short in the big games. And they're there. And so do I think they're going to be, a notch above a whole lot of teams, that are going to be, top 10? No, I think they are probably as good. And like I said, I just like them because of the consistency. So that's my best shot in the dark.
Yeah, I like that pick, and I was toying with that idea too. The concern I have there, they have the number 1 recruiting class, which, for whatever that's worth these days, it's worth something because you kind of want to have the number 1 portal recruiting class, but I'm not sure we really know how to judge those things. Tell me how good they're going to be at quarterback. I think I know who it's going to be. It's going to be Dante Moore, probably, who had transferred from UCLA a year ago and then redshirted this year. But I don't know how good he's going to be because he's as opposed to what they've had the last couple of years with Bo Nix and then Dylan Gabriel. He has very little experience, and those guys had all been through the fires both those guys been through the fires and they were really good.
Fair enough. Yep.
But if Dante Moore can play, or if they pick somebody up in the portal, then I think that's a great pick. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Since you picked Oregon, I'm gonna say this is finally the year 2020, because they finally got rid of that substandard quarterback who could barely play dead, and for some reason they wouldn't play the other guy. And of course, I'm being facetious because Quinn Ewers was really good for almost all year. Now, I don't think he was as good after he came back after it was the oblique injury, but he was a very good quarterback. But Arch Manning takes over. Texas brings back a ton, even though they lose a ton, and they're going to reload as much as anybody does this time. And so I think Texas, I don't know if I'm going to pick them to win the SEC, but I think they'll get it there. They look like a playoff team to me, and I think maybe Sark gets it done. So I'm going to pick Texas. And the reason is because it'll probably be somebody from off the board. And by that, I mean somebody out of one of the Power 2 conferences, meaning the SEC or the Big Ten, but somebody from off the board. Who is it? I don't know. All right. So you got Oregon, I got Texas. Let's do this. Give me somebody that you'd like. All right, there's no way anybody would pick these guys. And I don't mean Iowa State, as our friend Jonathan Howe would like us to pick. I just mean, is there somebody, probably somebody that it's probably Alabama. Like I was joking about it not being Alabama. Is there somebody like that you go, we should think about them?
So I think it could be a team like an Alabama that has a lot of talent, but has a totally unknown commodity at quarterback who turns out to be great in his first year as a starter. That is one possibility. There teams like Alabama falls into that category. The other, though, is a team like, and you see, somebody that nobody would really pick, who might have the best quarterback in the country, is LSU, because Garrett Nussmeier.
You just called him. He might be the best quarterback in the country.
Yeah, who you got?
Okay, I'm listening. Go ahead.
I mean, are you going with Arch Manning, who's hardly played?
No. I don't know who the best quarterback in the country will be next year. I'm just
saying, based on what the guys who we know are coming back and what we've seen them do on the field, Nussmeier is as good as anybody. LSU, even though they lose some guys, they generally don't have a problem finding talent at receiver. That's something that they've shown to be good at. The was much improved this year, and if they can make another step forward, I can see LSU having one of those years. Maybe I don't want to put them in the 2019 category, but that was a year where, I think 2018 LSU was not too different from what they were this year, and then just made a huge step forward. And a lot of that had to do with a really good quarterback who had a strong supporting cast around him. If you're asking me to go off the radar, pick a team that might not be ranked in the preseason top 10. Right. Yeah. And I mean, whether they would be preseason top 10, I have no idea. I don't know who else is out there, but they certainly didn't finish.
I'll bet they will be.
10. We haven't seen the final poll yet, but they won't be.
No, they won't be, but I bet they'll be preseason top 10. I'm going to go with one.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with one with a returning quarterback that I think we have sort of written off, but they made the playoff this year, and they have won national titles in the fairly recent past. And they wear a shade of orange and purple that's an odd color combination. And he's now grudgingly beginning to accept the portal world, Dabo Swinney. And so I'm going to say off the radar pick. These are not our picks. Off the radar pick for a team that could win the national championship next year, Clemson. Now, how far off the radar is either one of those? You just picked one that won it 5 years ago, and I picked one that won it whenever the last time Clemson won it was.
They won it the year before LSU
18,
did.
Yeah, 18. Yeah. So 6 years ago. So, but there's no doubt that both of those programs have fallen over the last 2 or 3 years significantly and have not been what they had been. But Cade Klubnik comes back. They bring back some guys that can play, and
they had a couple of really good freshman receivers this year. So their offense should be very good.
I think so, and we'll just see, right? So, but Again, those are the off the radar picks, and both of our off the radar picks are probably going to be in everybody's top 10. So how off the radar are they? I'm just not ready yet until we see it happen.
Yeah.
I'm not ready yet to say, oh yeah, I'm going to pick, I'm not going to pick Ole Miss and I mean some year, or Missouri, or Iowa State. Until we see it happen, it's hard not to still go with what you might consider the usual suspects. We'll see, right? Or Arizona State, right? Because we all saw that one coming. But anyway, that's about it. I know we could keep talking about the national title game. We're gonna be back to talk more football with you guys next week, and maybe we'll have a little more. Things have simmered a little bit longer. We'll have a better feel for kind of the game. This is an instant reaction type of thing, and then we'll have a better feel for maybe the whole season. But let's go ahead and close up the first half, come back and go to the second half. We'll talk about our favorite subject, which is our shared faith in Jesus. Right back right after this.
The Faith and Sports Institute at Baylor's Truett Seminary is a place where Christian leaders in sports are formed and equipped through theological education, practical training, and useful resources. As a sports ministry leader, coach, athlete, pastor, or student who wants to learn more, you can apply for admission in an online or residential graduate degree program, take continuing education certificate classes, and participate in character and leadership practicums. Start your journey at baylor.edu/truett/FSI. Think deep, lead strong, and run the race well with the Faith and Sports Institute today.
Welcome back into Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast. I am Brad Edwards, along with George Schroeder, as we have just wrapped up our conversation about the national championship game. And George, now it's time for us to talk about our faith.
Absolutely, our favorite subject, and we always do that by starting with what is our favorite segment of the show, which is the podcast, which is called On My Heart. And in that, we share what's on our heart right now that God's doing in our lives, or that we're observing in the lives of other people, kind of what God's impressing upon our heart. And this week, I know you've got something on your heart, Brad.
Yeah, so what's on my heart right now is kind of a result of a couple things that I had read. You mentioned one of them in the first half, which was the article at Baptist Press, which was about Riley Leonard, Notre Dame quarterback, and about his faith. There's also one that's at thegospelcoalition.org. If you want to look that up. If you want to go to my Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, I'm at JBradEdwards. I reposted it, retweeted it, whatever you want to call it.
Well, we'll retweet it from. We'll treat both of those articles from the Gridiron and the Gospel
okay,
X
that
account
sounds
here.
good. And
okay.
Yeah, and this one was written. It was by Paul Putz, our friend, a friend of the show, and he
director
did it
of the
with
Faith
Benjamin
and Sports
Watson.
Institute. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And, Benjamin Watson, a former Georgia, New England Patriots tight end who does some work, among other things, with Sports Spectrum now. And it was very insightful just as far as looking at this phenomenon of college football players specifically speaking up about their faith and just being very public about it. And beyond just the post-game interview where someone puts a microphone in somebody's face and the first line they say is, I want to thank God for this opportunity or this victory or whatever it is, and then they proceed to answer the question. It's been much deeper than that in many of these cases, as far as just guys expressing their faith and what it means to their life, and very encouraging, obviously, to see this. And just a few takeaways from reading this article. One is just this reality that now in this NIL era of college football, players have a bigger voice than they've ever had. And it used to be during the time when we covered it, George, you remember there were so many colleges that would have a very firm grip on which players are allowed to speak to the media at all. And they might have a group of 5 or 6 in their rotation. These are the guys they keep putting out there. But nobody else on that team was going to have a chance to talk to the media if they didn't want them to.
Well, as much as we love Mike Leach, and you and I loved him, he was notorious for, he literally would pick 2 players per year. He did this when he was at Texas Tech a couple of times. And and it might not even be the quarterback, which of course is really important, especially in his offense. And
Yeah.
they would trot them out for some small amount of time on the Monday or Tuesday of the availability each week, and that's all the reporters ever got. So, and he's an extreme case, but that's the kind of thing coaches would do. And so I have jumped into your on my heart segment. So I apologize. I jumped back
No,
out.
that's all right. But just kind of to that point, Nick Saban was like that too, where
Absolutely.
freshmen were off limits to the media
Mm-hmm.
under Saban. But you can't do that anymore because of NIL. And some of these, in fact, Alabama had a freshman this year who had his own podcast. Actually, a couple of freshmen did a podcast together. And so they now have a platform, players do, and they can talk about whatever they want to talk about. Nobody standing in their way. And so that is an opportunity for guys who are bold enough to express their faith. That opportunity is there. Another thing that is encouraging that was mentioned in this article is to see the guys who have done this, not just in a moment where things are going well for them. This is not, always after a win, but in many times after a loss, where guys have taken that opportunity to express their faith. And ultimately, that's what it's about. That it's for it to really have that meaning in your life. It means the same whether things are going well or whether things are not going your way. So we've seen that throughout the college football playoff. I know I would leave some people out by naming a few names here, but just as far as the teams, we've seen Ohio State players. We have seen, you mentioned Riley Leonard for Notre Dame, Texas players, Boise State players, the Boise State coach. And so this has been something that if you've been paying attention, there has been a lot of. And I guess my last takeaway from this that I want to share as far as what's on my heart is just the importance of us supporting and especially praying for these players who are putting themselves out there and willing to express their faith. Because, I think back to, when I was college age, and look, these guys are farther along than I was when I was their age. I can tell you that without any question. But even knowing that, I still know how much more maturing they have to do, within their walk. Like everybody who's that age has to be able to admit that. And so I realize the opportunity that is there for things to go sideways. Things will go wrong, right? All of us are going to have things that are going to go wrong in our lives. We're going to sin. We're going to make mistakes. And so I think that we all need to pray for these guys, pray for them not only to make good decisions and for them to live out the life that they are professing publicly, and to continue to be a good role model, a good example. But even in some cases where some of them may be fairly new to their faith and are learning along the way, pray for them to have good disciplers, where
Right.
they have, people that they can look up to who are going to continue to lead them in the right way so that their faith grows even stronger and doesn't go off in some direction that very easily can these days when there are so many different ideas out there about what it means to be a Christian, that they would just be biblical and just maintain that strong faith. And so that's really what's on my heart as this college football season comes to a close, is just kind of the opportunity for a lot of people to just get to know Christ through the profession of faith of some of these athletes that they look up to, and just for that to be front and center, and for people to just be more aware. Because I think in recent years, George, there's just been, and it's not just football, I think in sports in general, there has been so much of a tendency for people to say, hey, I'm just an athlete, right? I'm just going to do my thing. And I think because of a lot of pressure that was put on players not to say things outside of their lane, so to speak, that there's a perception out there that if you're a Christian, that you are not just in a minority group, but you're in a pretty small minority group. And I think there are times when guys do speak up, you start to realize, you know what? There are a lot more Christians out there than I thought there were. And I think that's where this can be a really powerful thing for people and can be really encouraging to people, is to see that, no, you're not alone, that there are a lot of people out there and some very prominent people who are believers, and they're not afraid to say so.
Yeah, listen, that's a good word. I appreciate that this was, that God brought that to your heart. I mean, I love this. And I know I mentioned this in the first half of our pod tonight. There's something going on college campuses that beyond athletics, we're seeing it because they're visible with college athletes, but just there's a movement of among college students, a spiritual movement that appears to be a movement toward Christ, and you're seeing college students come to Christ, and so an awakening of sorts. And so y'all who are Christ followers, would you pray that would grow, not just among football players, basketball players, athletes, but just throughout college campuses, that God would bring awakening and that people would come to Christ? That's what we should be asking. And then also, as it relates to athletes, I completely agree with you. Pray for those guys, because they do have, some of them have more fully formed faiths than others. But I want to say this: there's sometimes just sort of a knee-jerk skepticism, maybe even cynicism, about guys who pray or mention Christ after in the post-game interview, is kind of when we're talking about usually. And I get it. I understand that. And sometimes you don't know. And Benjamin Watson, and I would recommend the article you're talking about from the Gospel Coalition. Benjamin Watson did make the point that you don't always know if it's just something where you're sort of culturally brought up to say thanks to Jesus after something happens. So I understand that. But I am encouraged by if you're listening to what they're saying, sometimes it sounds different than just that. And as you said, you're hearing it after losses too, not just after success, which can be God wanted my team to win, is kind of what we would skeptically think, right? Riley Leonard, we don't have the post-game comments, but I'm guessing if you go look at the transcripts when they come out, he will have thanked the Lord. He had two things written. He had Matthew 23:12 on a wristband tonight. He had Proverbs 27:17 written kind of in Sharpie or something on his left hand. Proverbs 27:17 says, iron sharpens iron, or as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And then Matthew 23:12 says, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. And he has talked about that being sort of a verse that has really impacted his life. And I just appreciate the witness there. And my prayer is exactly what yours is. And my prayer is that we will pray for these guys, but that people will come to Christ as a result of their witness. So here's the thing: they're up on a pedestal. They're very visible, and they're young. And I don't care if you're young or old; it's real easy to fall. And then, I would say two things: pray that they won't. So pray that they find good disciplers and that they grow in their faith, as you were mentioning. Pray that they won't. But even if some of them do, I think there's some ways that we need to learn how to, and Benjamin Watson was hitting at this in this article. How do we speak the truth in love to them rather than sort of come down hard on them for not, whether they fall or whether they're theologically off on something that they're saying? We have a tendency as Christ followers, as evangelical Christ followers, to like come down really hard on guys. And so we need to lovingly share the truth. And I think that's hard for us. A lot of times we're like, this is what it's supposed to be. And we just hammer people instead of just sort of finding a way to lovingly correct them. And frankly, some of us don't need to get on Twitter and lovingly correct them, because that ought to be properly handled by the pastor or the discipler in that guy's life. Quite frankly, some of our tendency to want to like set somebody straight on Twitter ought to not happen. You should never press send on those things. So anyway, I don't know exactly where I was going with that. I really appreciate what's on your heart. It is a good word, and my prayer is that those guys will grow in Christ and that more people will come to know Christ on these campuses, on these teams, and beyond, because of their witness. Something's happening. Let's pray that the Lord would really expand it. That would be tremendous. That's
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's a tremendous on my heart, and I don't know how we would follow that. That's a good way to wrap up a instant reaction show from the college football playoff for this week's episode.
It's a little later than we normally finish because of us going live after the game. It is now after midnight my time. So I'm all in favor of wrapping up if you are.
Yeah, let's go another hour and a half, and then you can get up for work in the morning. How about that?
Right. Well, yeah, we'll do that. So before we finish up here, just want to mention that next week I think the pod will go back to dropping at the normal time, which would be Monday morning.
Sometime Monday morning.
And we'll do a season wrap up where we'll just kind of maybe do a little bit of looking back as well as possibly a tiny bit of looking ahead, but not specifically about the championship game anymore, and just some of our final thoughts on the 2024 season. So with that, I would just say, as we always do, visit us online at gridironandthegospel.com. Find us on Twitter or Instagram at gridiron_gospel. And if you're not watching us on YouTube and you are brave enough to want to look at us for about an hour, then you can just search for Gridiron and the Gospel on YouTube, and you can watch us chat.
Absolutely. And you can also reach either one of us on our individual Twitter or X handles at George Schroeder and at J. Brad Edwards. That's a good way to find us. And please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe in your favorite podcast app. And most of you guys already listened to us on that, but you can search for Gridiron and the Gospel. You can follow the links on the show website, and tune in next week for more Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith in college football podcast.